Welcome back to Combat Mission Shock Force 2, where we're going to take a quick look at Syrian Mechanized Airborne Infantry Platoons. As always with SF2's Syrian Armed Forces, it's important to understand that they're organised in a kind of regime security food chain. The higher up the pyramid you get, the smaller and more loyal the forces are, so they get the best equipment and the best training to better suppress the larger, potentially less loyal forces below them. Syrian Airborne are near the top of that food chain. They're technically part of the Syrian Special Forces. According to the manual for the Marines module, which adds them into the game, SF2's Syrian Airborne are from the 14th Airborne Division, the battalions of which are a hybrid of standard mechanized infantry force and special forces, which reflects the fact that in practice the airborne designation is more honorific than practical capability. A good way to conceptualise them is as Special Forces adjacent. They provide the mass and the firepower that Special Forces themselves lack. As always with the Syrians and Shock Force, don't let the labels fool you. They're a high quality unit compared to the rest of the Syrian army and will struggle to compete with basic NATO forces. The principal individual weapon for the Syrian Airborne is the AK-74M, which is chambered for 5.54 by 39 ammunition. This is basically a refinement of the 7.62 by 39 used in the more common AKM. To simplify, 5.45 has better ballistics, lower recoil, and soldiers can carry more of it. Unlike Syrian regular infantry though, there are only a couple of basic riflemen per squad. These squads are small, only 6 men strong, and also include a PKM general purpose machine gun, an RPG-7 or an RPG-16, and an AK-74 fitted with a GP-30 underbarrel grenade launcher, while the squad leader and the RPG gunner carry AKS-74U carbines. We've covered the PKM and RPG-7 before. The first is a belt-fed GPMG firing 7.62x51R in the light role. The RPG-7 fires heat and HE rockets out to about 600 meters in combat mission. The Airborne do carry PG-7VR rockets though. This has a tandem warhead that allows it to defeat explosive reactive armor, so it's much more dangerous than basic heat rockets. The RPG-16 is basically the paratrooper version of the RPG-7. The main feature here is that it's suitable for airborne operations. It's smaller and lighter than the RPG-7 and it can be broken down into 2 pieces. One distinct difference is that the RPG-16's rockets fit entirely inside the launch tube, unlike the RPG-7's, which generally have the warhead protruding out the front. There are pros and cons to this. The RPG-16 has a larger diameter launch tube, 58mm versus 40. That translates into having more propellant in the rockets, and thus faster, more accurate ammunition with a flatter trajectory. The downside is that the warhead size is limited to the size of the tube. So while RPG-16 rockets are capped at 58mm, actually smaller than the 66mm bazooka, something like a PG-7B has a much larger 85mm warhead, giving the RPG-7 considerably better armor penetration. In combat mission terms, the RPG-16 can only reach out to 500 meters, and honestly it's hard to tell if it's more accurate. The GP-30 is broadly analogous to the more familiar American M203. It's also a 40mm weapon, but is somewhat less useful due to a lack of HEDP ammunition. Instead, it's restricted to VOG 25 high explosive grenades. Interestingly, these are caseless, so unlike the M203 which is breech loading, GP-30s are muzzle loading. In CM they have an effective range of about 200 meters. Finally, the AKS-74U is pretty much a cut-down AK-74. Not much to talk about there, although it's worth noting that one is carried by the RPG gunner, giving the Airborne a little bit more firepower than regular Syrian infantry whose RPG gunners just carry pistols. The ammunition loadout for the basic squad has a couple of gaps in it. It's got 1,305 rounds of 5.45 and 36 40mm HE grenades, which is all good. But by default there are only 100 rounds of 7.60x51 for the PKM, and either 3 58mm heat rockets for the RPG-16 or only 2 rockets for the RPG-7, 1 PG-7VR tandem heat and 1 OG-7V high explosive. There's more ammunition available in their vehicles, but we'll get to that in a bit. As per usual for Soviet-style TOE, there are 3 squads per platoon, and the platoon leader is folded into the first squad. This brings it up to 7 men. The platoon leader is a direct replacement for the squad leader, and the extra man carries a second AK-74 fitted with a GP-30, so you get an extra grenade launcher. Less usually for Soviet-style TOE, the platoon also has a marksman team attached. This is 2 men strong, one armed with an SVD marksman rifle and the other with an AK-74M. How useful they're going to be is going to depend on the circumstances, but more bodies are always nice. Nobody has body armor, but squad leaders, platoon leaders and the marksman team leader have radios, binoculars and, shockingly for the Syrians, night vision equipment. Confusingly, at night the entire squad is shown with night vision binoculars and night vision optics on their weapons. That's not correct. Only the unit leader actually has the night vision. This gives Syrian Airborne a bit of an advantage against regular Syrian troops, but it isn't going to help much against NATO. Syrian Airborne Mech ride around in BMP-3s, which have a whole video to themselves that I'll link down below. I'm not going to go into that much detail here, but the variant in Shock Force does have a few quirks compared to the more modern Russian variants in Black Sea. The TLDR though is that the BMP design goes all in on firepower and doesn't concern itself with trivial matters like protection and ergonomics. The main weapon is a 100mm gun. This is only equipped with high explosive ammunition in Shock Force 2. This isn't air bursting like it is in Black Sea either, it's just contact fused. But the main gun can also fire AT-10 ATGMs from the barrel. This obviously means that it can be loaded and fired under armour, unlike the AT-4s on the BMP-1Ps. Mounted coaxially to the 100mm gun is a 30mm cannon. This has a dual feed with both armour-piercing discarding sabot and high explosive incendiary ammunition. Coaxially mounted on the other side of the 100mm is the usual PKT machine gun. Of course, one machine gun is apparently not enough. There are 2 more in ball mounts on either side of the bow operated by the passengers. The BMP-3 carries 40 rounds of 100mm HE, 8 AT-10s, 300 rounds of 30mm HEI and 195 rounds of 30mm APDS, plus a comical amount of coax ammo. This might sound great, but all that ammo is crammed into a small space under some very thin armour. The BMP-3 is proof against 50 cal fire in its frontal arc, but that's the limit, and all that ammunition has a tendency to produce cataclysmic explosions when the vehicle gets penetrated. It's not for nothing that it's jokingly referred to in the CM community as a BBIED. So the BMP-3 is a bit of a glass cannon. It doesn't have any other defensive equipment such as ERA, STORA or APS like Black Sea variants, except for the usual Soviet-style offensive smoke launchers. These are the older ones though, so they don't produce multispectral smoke and they're not going to help against NATO thermal imagers. The BMP-3 did get a good score on the vehicle mobility course at 433 points, which is an upgrade over the BMP-2's 499, a difference which persists even if we take out the ground test because the BMP-3 only bogged once. It's also a little bit worse than the BMP-3M from Black Sea, which tracks because that is an upgraded model. Plus, of course, it's a BMP, so it's also amphibious. It's got a crew of 2, driver and gunner. Unlike BMP-1s and 2s, the engine is now in the rear of the vehicle and the driver sits up front in the centre instead of on the left. The gunner is behind him up in the turret. There are 10 extra seats, 2 on either side of the drivers, where passengers can man the bow MGs. The commander's seat is in the turret next to the gunner, which is where the squad leader is supposed to go. Then there are 7 more seats in the back. You probably have to starve the troops a bit if you want to actually fit 10 men inside. It's technically possible, but in reality 7 is more of a usual complement. The rear passengers have firing ports, so they can engage from inside the vehicle with their personal weapons, but it's not an easy vehicle to get in and out of. It's very cramped, the squad is split up inside the vehicle, and the rear passengers have to open top and rear hatches before scrambling out over the engine block. The BMP-3s do carry extra ammunition for their dismounts. More than 2,000 rounds of 5.45 and more than 5,000 of 7.62x51, which I guess is what you need when you've got 3 PKTs on your vehicle. But it's also got 540 rounds of 7.62x39, which the Airborne don't actually use, no extra 40mm grenades for the GP30s, and no extra RPG-16 rockets, but it does have 5 extra PG-7V heat rockets for the RPG-7. So this is a little bit weird in how it compensates for some of the reduced ammunition for the dismounts. The PK gunners with only 100 rounds can bulk up on 7.62x51, and squads equipped with RPG-7s can supplement their individual tandem heat and HE rockets with the PG-7Vs. That's good and all, but RPG-16 users are stuck with the 3 rockets carried by the dismounts and they don't have a way to resupply. In other words, if you're picking a Syrian Airborne force in CM, they're going to have a lot more staying power with the RPG-7 than the RPG-16, provided they've got their BMP-3s on hand and you remember to load them up with rockets. To round out the vehicles, the crew does have some night vision equipment, but they don't have thermal optics. This isn't the modernised BMP-3M, it's the original export model from the 90s. So, that's a quick once-over of the Syrian Airborne Mechanised platoon. It's really going to be interesting putting these guys through the platoon patrol scenario and comparing them to the Syrian Mech Infantry and BMP-1s. I suspect having a 100mm gun and a 30mm cannon is going to make a huge difference. The question is whether that's going to offset the fragility of the BMPs and the small number of dismounts. I'll leave a link to that video down below when it goes live. Hope you all enjoyed this one. Syrian Airborne are some of the more capable and interesting Syrians in Shock Force 2. If you'd like to see these videos early and support the channel, you can do so via Patreon or YouTube memberships, whether you do or not. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.